Obviously into the good morning to you first of all. Race moved into the Alps yesterday. Julian Alaphilippe continues out in front, 1:30 back to his pursuance now from Team Ineos, not in the top 10 favourites I looked at before pre-race. Who is this guy, Ross, and has he now won the race, or is there some sort of possibility with a couple of big stages to come that he gets sucked back into the pack here?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. I'm glad you raised that he wasn't in the top 10 favourites, because I was actually going to ask you that. He's obviously a bit enigmatic to people who don't follow the sport too closely. But for about the last 4 or 5 years, he's been one of the most dominant short stage and short tour races and single day race riders in the peloton. He started out, I think, in 2015 winning stages. He's won the Tour of California, which is a 1 week long race. He's had a couple of top sixes at races like the Dauphiné, which is a big prep race for the Tour de France. He's won stages in the Tour. He's won stages in the Vuelta. He's worn the King of the Mountains jersey. He's worn the Young Riders jersey. So he's got some pedigree behind him. But of course, nobody was thinking this was the man who, heading into the final weekend of the Tour, was going to be in yellow. So it is another surprise. The last few first-time winners of the Tour de France have been surprising. I'd say he's the least surprising of the lot, because he's got a degree of pedigree. He's an explosive climber. He's built like a climber. I think he weighs in the low 60 kilograms. So that certainly predisposes him to going uphill well. As to whether he's going to hold on, is he the favourite? I get the impression that he's teetering on the edge, and the finish line of this race can't come soon enough for him. I think that the next few days will just he's surprised everyone up to this point, so who knows. But I have a feeling that the high altitude today and the mountaintop finish and then tomorrow's long climb will do for him, and he will probably not hold on to it, but we'll see.
We're all obviously somewhat obsessed with the former Team Sky, Team Ineos over this part of the world. So it was kind of that I was most interested in to some degree to speak about. And Egan Bernal did make some ground yesterday. Geraint Thomas stayed in the same bunch as the Frenchman in the run-in yesterday. Was there any surprise that Ineos haven't been more aggressively almost trying to eat into this lead?
Yeah, I just don't think they've had the watch this year. In the past 5 or 6 years where they have won and dominated the Tour de France, they've just thrown 4 or 5 guys at the bottom of the final climb, and they've kept the pace at a level where no one else can match and compete and attack. And it seems to me that those support riders are disappearing much sooner this year than they were before. So the scenario in the last few years has been with 2 or 3 kilometers to go, Ineos or Sky back then are still in a position of strength. This year, they've really only got their 2 leaders left. And so that has changed the dynamic of the race. There's no doubt that other teams have had opportunities that in the past they wouldn't have had. So that has been something of a surprise. I don't know why that is. I mean, on a technical point of view, for the last decade, people have been trying to measure the performances, estimate the watts and so forth. But there's still no direct measurement coming out of it. So is the peloton at the front moving 2% faster, and as a result, Ineos can't put 5 guys in it? Or is the pace the same and they're weaker? I genuinely don't know. But for whatever reason, it's created an open race, a more open race than there has been in the past, and that has been, certainly watching it, much more entertaining.
For sure, and you could say that it's a more open race because Chris Froome isn't there. Granted, he didn't win it last year, but he certainly helped Team Sky hold their stranglehold over the rest of the peloton in the Tour de France. Like you say, the lack of data that we have, it's very kind of loose when you do throw out times and climbing times and all that sort of thing, but it is the only thing we can really go off. And yesterday, Quintana, I think, set the record for the fastest ascent up the Galibier, I think beating Schleck's record from 2011 or something like that. So, like, we do have records being set. We do still have evidence that the Tour de France is not getting any slower. In fact, it's going the opposite way.
No, it's quick. It's quick. And obviously there's a margin of error here because of the circumstances and the conditions around each climb individually. But collectively, we're seeing cyclists today at the same level they were. You see, they're not quite at the same level they were in the mid to late 90s and the early 2000s. But certainly since about 2003-04, the Tour has stayed at more or less the same level with a couple of drops. This year is not one of those. And so Yeah, yesterday Quintana was faster. The first big mountain stage when they finished on that gravel section, that was incredibly fast, and there were 9 guys, I think, at the front, all riding these unbelievable speeds. So yeah, it's been quick, but it remains to me a source of frustration that we can't quantify it with more accuracy, because I think it would be really useful to know exactly how quick it is and where it. So for instance, I was looking at the Tourmalet climb from the other day. The first 9 kilometers was a minute slower than it had been done in the past, and the last 5 kilometers was a minute faster. So maybe the way it's being raced has changed. It's more conservative. They start slower, they finish harder. So there's a lot of detail in the performance data that we are, I think, currently missing. And that makes it difficult to arrive at any, not conclusion, but even a hypothesis.
Do you know if there's any appetite from cycling authorities to make this data compulsory to reveal, perhaps? I know that's perhaps a step too far. Team Sky previously said it's not something they're interested in, but it's been publicised that there was doping checks done in the early hours of yesterday morning. Cyclists not happy about that, but it's convenient that story is being pushed out there so that we, the public, know that there is a lot of testing going on in this tour. Surely just releasing more data would help that to no end, Ross.
Yeah, I'm biased because I'm a data guy, obviously. But for me, you collect data today because you don't even necessarily have to know what purpose it will serve in a couple of years. But just for the sake of good record keeping, you should have that data. I mean, obvious example, Thibaut Pinot is if Alaphilippe is not going to win this tour, Pinot is probably one of the 2 favorites to win it. Him plus Egan Bernal. Now, Pinot's been around for years and he's been consistently challenging in the mountains, but never quite good enough to take the next step. If he does it this year, the question I think would be quite interesting is, has he found 2% extra, or has everyone else just come back to him? Now, you can't answer that question, so we're left to speculate. Now, when the teams say we don't want to put our power data there because then you'll know our performance capabilities, I find that nonsense, because my other really top sport is track and field, and if I'm in a 100-meter race against Usain Bolt, I know to the 100th of a second what I have to do. It doesn't help me do it. I mean, knowing that Usain Bolt's going to run 9.71 seconds is not going to help me beat the guy. So how does knowing that the front of the peloton is moving at 5.8 watts a kilogram for 25 minutes going to help me do it if I don't have the capacity? But anyway, point is, I think that the sport would be much better off if it actually provided data. We have this conversation every year about transparency, not just about anti-doping, but around performances and so forth. So
why do they not want to reveal it? What's the official? Is there any utterances from them as to why this would not be something that they'd be happy just to give out?
Well, logistics and cost, I think, are primary among them, which I understand, because different teams use different power meters, and the UCI is not going to impose a standardized one on them. And if they don't, then you have to ask questions around the calibration and so forth of data. And so these are challenges. I don't think they're insurmountable challenges. Formula One gets data from its cars, and it's probably 10 times more sophisticated and advanced. So it can be done, but that's one of them. And the other one is I just think there's no appetite for it. They don't see the point, and I understand to some extent that, because they want to stamp collect. But I do think there are questions. In 2010, 2011, we were asking the same questions, and we'll be asking them in 2028 because no one's doing anything to change the status quo. So Alaphilippe is a great example. Oh, everyone in Britain is saying, this guy's transformation is unbelievable. How is this possible? But what are you questioning? Do you know the size of the thing you're questioning? No.
As somebody who's watched this in a very detailed manner, and it's interesting that you bring up the British reaction to this. His performance is less surprising from the base he's come from than, say, Chris Froome, for sure. Is it less surprising than Geraint Thomas?
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt. Thomas was more pedigreed than Froome, and Froome probably, Wiggins at least had an Olympics track pursuit background. But Alaphilippe is look, I'm still surprised that he's there. I didn't expect him to be there, and I wouldn't have picked him in the top 10 either. but his last 4 or 5 years has been among the most spectacular in the sport. It's surprising that he's managed to generate and sustain that level over 3 weeks and over the scale of the climbs that he has. But this is not the outrageous alien transformation we've seen from riders in the past. So it's just typical, classic example of how people's perceptions of the facts are colored by what they want those facts to tell them. And that's exactly what's happening now, you know. So the same transformation, or an even lesser transformation, is now suddenly suspicious, whereas for the last 5 or 6 years it's been down to advancements in nutrition and technology and training.
Can I ask you just one slight sidebar question, Ross, on the overall sort of race positions and the position particularly of Team Ineos? Is that seen as a shortcoming of the riders in this instance, or is there blame to be laid at the door of Dave Brailsford here? Is it tactical versus individual performance, I guess?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the causes are. I mean, reality is that in Bernal and Thomas, they've still got 2 podium places, which any team would have taken at the start of the race. So this is difficult to criticize them for. What they haven't been able to exert is the same level of total control over the races in the past. And you can probably dissect 3 or 4 reasons for that. Injuries, the loss of Froome, having to adjust their plan when that happened. Remember, Bernal was supposed to ride in Italy, and then illness put paid to that, or an injury. And so they had to probably readjust the plan. So in hindsight, when people sit down to do post-mortems, they'll probably find 5 things that couldn't be controlled and 2 or 3 that might have been. They'll blame the expulsion of Luke Rowe for part of these names. No, so I don't know. Someone eventually is accountable, of course, for every performance, but I just think they haven't had the watts to control the race in the way that they have in the past, you know? Tactics is easy when you can just put 5 guys on the front who go faster than everyone else.
Yeah, it's true. Just one last thing before we let you go, Ross, because it's a story that's gone around the world this week. It was Sun Yang, and then you had the scenes of Duncan Scott and Matt Horton refusing to share a podium with him. He's somebody who's served a 3-month ban, refused to give a urine sample recently. You can talk about omerta in cycling. It seems that the opposite thing is happening in swimming circles.
Yeah, so speaking also of how nationalist biases color perceptions, that's been really interesting to watch, because the China versus Australia or China versus the West arguments have really hotted up. I posted a video and I didn't even comment on the validity or the merits of the protest, and for the next 3 days I had fights going on in Chinese and English on my timeline on Twitter. So people get very fired up around patriotic reasons. It seems quite clear to me that swimming has very little anti-doping credibility. I can't think of many bans in swimming over the last decade. You know, we sit and criticize cycling and track and field, but at least they're catching people. Now, I don't for a second believe that swimmers are all clean, and yet swimming hardly ever catches its own athletes. So I think that Sun Yang is emblematic of a problem with the anti-doping system. Now, what's happened is he's got this previous 3-month ban, which people already see as slightly lenient, because that was reduced for not technicalities, but because he was able to convince them that it wasn't deliberate cheating. People are always suspicious over that. And then he has this incident revealed where he's taken a hammer to his blood samples, which is, I can't think of an act that screams guilt more than doing that. It's unbelievable. But when you read the specific legal decision, because FINA convenes this panel, they rationalize his behavior as the result of understandable paranoia, lack of confidence in the testers. He didn't believe the accreditation. They didn't manage to make him see that destroying his samples would land him in trouble. And so step by step, they move aside all these reasons why this behavior should be punished, and they say you can continue to swim. Now, when that happens, Sun Yang obviously is the catalyst or the symptom, but the condition is the credibility and the structure of anti-doping, and that's what the swimmers should be protesting. And I think it's great that they're doing it. I just don't. It doesn't sit comfortably with me that they're focusing their protest on that specific person, when really the thing that's let them down is the anti-doping system.
All right, Ross, thanks a million for joining us this morning.
Sure, no worries. Always good to chat. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. We'll speak soon. Ross Tucker on the line there to chat all things swimming and Tour de France as well. It's a fair point about the tactics, because it was one thing that jumped out at me, and the reason I asked the question, which was what I should have said, was that Geraint Thomas was the pre-race favourite, and then obviously he's some way back, and depending on who you read, they're either still in with a bit of a chance of doing it, or actually Alaphilippe is just it's already done, actually, in some instances.
They had their chance yesterday.
Yeah.
And he refused to be the team player, it seemed. To not hang back and allow Bernal to go after Alaphilippe it just seems like really, really poor management. And I don't know if that's Brailsford's instruction to him saying, you do whatever you want, Geraint. You can go, you're the Tour de France champion, you can do whatever you want. But that just doesn't tally with what happened last year, which is when Froome allowed Thomas to go and actually win the Tour de France and take the yellow jersey off him. So it's extraordinary.
Yeah, you don't know what's going on in the background. I mean, the point about it just struck me that it's a perfectly reasonable point about tactics versus whatever riders you have. It's like put the best footballers in the world in a team, you get the best team.
Yeah, it's true.
Right, we're going to leave that one for the minute. Just 10 to 9 on this Friday morning. We're going to talk to Niall O'Brien in a few minutes' time about the potential of Irish success at Lords. We're going to get his predictions ahead of that. Is it the greatest Irish sport? Would it be the greatest Irish sporting moment of all time? Will be chief amongst the topics we're going to talk to Niall about. John Duggan is going to join us in the studio to talk to us about the week that was for Shane Lowry as well, and plenty more things besides. So before all of that, a few weeks ago, a few of us here in Team Off the Ball, with thanks to Horse Racing Ireland, I got to experience something pretty cool. We were given a horse for the day as the Aidan McGuinness trained Ozzie Valentine represented the Off the Bridle. Was it Off the Bridle or On the Bridle?
On the Bridle.
The On the Bridle
I thought
Syndicate.
it should have been Off the Bridle.
It really should have been. The On the Bridle Syndicate at Leopardstown. There was Gerard, Tom Malone was there, John Duggan and Owen was there as well, all involved. And here's what's happened.